أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى أهل بيته الأطيبين الأطهرين الهداة المهديين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم إلى قيام يوم الدين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Let us take a brief look today at a few of the ahadith of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salatu wassalam that discuss the importance and the definition of makarimul akhlaq, the noblest and the best manners and etiquette with which a person can live in the world. And these makarimul akhlaq, the noble qualities of a believer, they are an essential part of our obligation as a Muslim, because this was the character of the Prophet and Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salatu wassalam, and it was the message, the goal of the Prophet and the Imams for their followers and people who are associated with them to develop these attributes. This is the way that we can preserve our faith, and this is the way that we can spread our faith. It's not going to be by winning debates or answering the questions or the objections of non-believers that the majority of people will be convinced that it is worth taking a second look at Islam. When people have questions, then of course, the answers to those questions will help them on the path of, of accessing the truth, of achieving guidance. But usually that first step, it comes from a moral revelation. It comes from realizing that there is a wisdom, there is a depth, there is a profundity, there is a beauty in the religion or the school of thought that a person is interested in or curious about. So that first step will often come not from argumentation, not from intellectual debates, but from moral and ethical practices, from the character of believers. It's the nature of intellectual debate that it often makes people kind of sensitive. And so I become defensive, and in the discussion, only very few people are truly looking for guidance. The majority of people, they're just trying to look for a way to win the argument, or at least to avoid being defeated in the argument. But when I see somebody whose character is noble, then rather than increasing my defenses, it disarms me. And I am more likely to take what that person says seriously. So that's why the first step is to influence people with our character, preserving our own faith, passing on our faith in our families, and also sharing our faith with those who are not followers of Ahlul Bayt or are not Muslims. In all three of those arenas, the primacy of akhlaq is something that experience has shown. So let us look at a few of the ahadith that Ahlul Bayt have given us. One is a hadith which is reported from Abdullah ibn Sinan. Now, this hadith is not attributed to an imam, and it's only very rarely among the hadith of Ahlul Bayt that we have a saying which is not explicitly attributed to an imam. But sometimes there was reason for a follower of Ahlul Bayt who believed in Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq والسلام, as the imam, for example, not to directly quote the imam. So sometimes, there may be a common person and he says, قال رجل من بني هاشم. A man from Bani Hashim said X, Y, or Z. And we don't know, is that person quoting Imam Ja'far Sadiq or not? Because that person is not a Shia. Or if they are a Shia of Ahlul Bayt, we don't know if they are going to narrate exclusively from the Imams. Sometimes that is the case. But at other times, we have well-known Shia narrators, people who are known to have the belief in the imamat of the imams, and so they would not narrate just from a random person. If they don't quote the imam directly, then chances are it is because there was some difficulty in quoting the imam. So Abdullah ibn Sinan is one of those people who is a prominent Shia and a reliable and authentic narrator of ahadith of Ahlul Bayt. The majority of the ahadith narrated by Abdullah ibn Sinan, they come from Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salatu wassalam. However, Abdullah ibn Sinan lived during the time of the Caliph Harun from the Abbasid dynasty, commonly known as Harun al-Rashid, the father of Ma'mun, and the same Caliph who was responsible for the martyrdom of Imam Musa al-Kadhim alayhi salatu wassalam, and committed that grave crime against Allah and Islam and humanity. Because Abdullah ibn Sinan was in some way associated with the Abbasid court, and according to narrations had actually been appointed as a judge by the Abbasid Caliph. So there might have been a reason for Abdullah ibn Sinan sometimes to hide his association with the Imam. And this is something that some of the prominent companions of our Imams, people like Ali ibn Yaqtin, who was a loyal follower of Imam Musa al-Kadhim, but was also a minister and an official in the Abbasid court. This is something they had to do because they were actually followers and they were obedient to the Imam, and they were only serving in the Abbasid court or as Abbasid officials in obedience to the Imam in order to be able to lessen the evil or the oppression of the government, or to provide assistance to the Shia and the common people who were ruled by the Abbasids. So these companions of our Imams, they had a very difficult task. In their heart and in their intention, they were carrying out the obligation of a Shia in obedience to the Imam. So they were following the instructions of the Imam. But outwardly, they could not mention that intention. They could not mention that loyalty. And this might be the reason why Abdullah ibn Sinan does not explicitly mention Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq. In any case, he says that a man from Bani Hashim said, but we know from the character of Abdullah ibn Sinan, because he was a loyal follower of the Imams, that he would not just quote a random person who was not ma'asum. And in addition, the message of this hadith, it is in accordance with many other ahadith that we have from the Prophet and from the Imams alayhimu salatu wassalam. So the hadith is arba'un man kunna fihi kamula islamuh. If a person has 4 attributes, then their Islam is considered to be perfected and complete. وَإِنْ كَانَ مِنْ قَرْنِهِ إِلَى قَدَمِهِ خَطَايَا لَمْ يَنْقُصْهُ. Even if that person is filled from their head to their toe, from their head to their feet, with mistakes and with sins, لَمْ يَنْقُصْهُ. Their faith will not be compromised, because their good qualities will compensate for their weaknesses and will ensure that their faith remains complete and remains perfect. What are those four attributes? الصدق والحياء وحسن الخلق والشكر. One is sidq, if they are honest. When we are honest, that can in many ways prevent us from committing sins. Because if I know that I am not going to lie, then I will not do something in private that I would be embarrassed if people found out about later on. Because in public, if I'm asked about it, then it is not going to be in my nature to tell a lie. Just the idea that I cannot tell a lie prevents me from being tempted or giving into temptations, even when no one is there to observe me. That attribute, it is protection from sin. It is protection from temptation. Wal haya, and if I am chaste and modest, that means that when I am confronted with a whispering of shaitan, then I'm able to block it out, because the haya and the modesty in my heart, that will protect me. Wa husnul khulq, and if a person is kind and good in their dealings with other people. Was shukr, and gratitude. If I express and I feel thankful for the kindness, for the favors that have been done to me. I feel grateful to Allah first and foremost. I feel grateful to my parents, my teachers, my loved ones, and I feel grateful to any other person who has shown a kindness to me. So that means that I am not going to be selfish. It means that I am going to be humble in front of other people. The spirit of these four attributes of honesty and a sense of shame and propriety, a sense of gratitude, and a good way in dealing with other people, these four attributes are so essential to Iman that, according to this hadith, and we don't know, as I said earlier, explicitly which of the ma'asumin this hadith is attributed to, but according to this hadith, which represents the collective teachings of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salatu wassalam, even if a person is filled with sin and shortcomings, these good attributes will come and preserve and protect and even perfect that person's iman. The next hadith is from a companion of our sixth Imam, Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salatu wassalam, by the name of Hammad ibn Uthman. And this companion of our Imam, he narrates that a person came to Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq in the presence of Hammad, and he said to Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salam, Yabna Rasulillah, that you are the son of the Messenger of Allah, you are the descendant and the heir of Rasulullah. Akhbirni am makarim al-akhlaq. So tell me, what are these noble attributes that the person may have heard about in different ahadith? Because the Prophet was known to have preached and to have practiced makarim al-akhlaq. So maybe because the person had heard that label, but he didn't know exactly which akhlaq were being represented, he came to the person who is the heir and the closest one to the Prophet, Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salatu wassalam, and he says, Akhbirni am makarim al-akhlaq. What are these great qualities, these attributes that are mentioned? And the Imam says, al-afu, pardon me, al-afu amman zalamak. Forgive that person who has wronged you. Normally, we are hesitant to let go of slights, of insults, of harm that we may suffer from other people. And being able to forgive, being able to let go of our grudges or our ill will or our hurt, that is one of those noble characteristics that is described by Ahlul Bayt as among makarimul akhlaq, the noble attributes. Al-afu amman zalamak. So forgive a person who has wronged you. Don't wait for an apology and for compensation, but have it within you to forgive. Now, sometimes you should not forgive because the injustice is ongoing and you need to continue to oppose the injustice in order to serve the cause of Islam or to serve the cause of truth. So the hadith is telling us that the readiness and the willingness to forgive, let go of my ego and be willing to forgive a person if they have wronged me. That is makarim al-akhlaq. But whether I actually tell the person that I have forgiven them, whether in my heart I actually release that person of their debt to me, that depends on if it is in the interest of Islam, if it is the right thing to do at that time. And it's not always the case. Sometimes when I tell a person I forgive you, then I just give them more courage to wrong me again. And that's not a good thing. Sometimes if I tell a person I forgive you, then I might encourage them to wrong somebody else and continue doing evil. And that's also not a good thing. But I should be able to forgive. My ego should not prevent me from forgiving. وَصِلَةُ مَنْ قَطَعَكَ. In the same vein, the Imam says that if somebody has cut you off, has forgotten you, they don't call, they don't return your calls, they express anger or maybe a grudge against you, then continue to do kindness to them. And this applies especially to family members because qati'atul rahim and the opposite, silatul rahim, qati'atul rahim means cutting off the ties of family, and silatul rahim is to keep alive the ties of family. These are attributes that have been strongly emphasized in Islamic teachings. Qati'atul rahim, cutting off family ties, is a grave sin. Silatul rahim, connecting and keeping the connections with family members, is a very important Islamic obligation that we have. So silatu man qata'ak is to keep a connection to those who may not keep a connection to us. That does not apply exclusively to family, but it's especially important and in fact an obligation when it comes to our relatives and our family members. But to keep that connection is among makarim al-akhlaq. And this can mean that you keep contacting somebody, keep looking after them, asking after them, offering help if there's something you can do to help them when they are in difficulty. Sometimes, however, a person may not even pick up the phone if you call. Sometimes they may not respond well if you visit them or if you keep in touch. And especially with family, when there is anger, then we see these negative actions from relatives or from family members. In these cases, then sila, or keeping the connection, might be simply by letting it be known that you don't have anger in your heart. And if the other person changes their mind, then your door is open. It may not be possible or it may not be helpful to visit them or to phone them, call them on the phone and try to speak to them because they may not be ready or willing for that. But you can tell their other relatives that my door is always open. I have no ill will in my heart. You may ask about their health and their well-being, from your other relatives who are still close to the other person. And in that way, you can keep a connection. You can show that you don't have rancor or anger in your heart. And maybe, inshallah, the other person will also respond well after the passage of time and their own emotions may have cooled down. And if that doesn't take place, then you can keep a connection. You can keep some level of sila by praying for that person, even if you're not able to keep a direct connection. So the teaching of Imam Ja'far Sadiq alayhi salam was, وَصِلَةُ مَنْ قَطَعَكَ. If somebody has cut off their connection to you, keep alive that connection. Again, with the understanding that this is not to be done if it is going to cause greater harm, or if there is a a higher obligation to avoid contact, such as if it's going to harm the other person or it's going to harm you, but it's a general principle that we find highly emphasized in the teachings of Ahlul Bayt. وَإِعْطَاءُ مَنْ حَرَمَكَ. If somebody has deprived you, then give to that person. You know, sometimes when we ask somebody for a favor and they don't respond well, our natural response is that when the tables are turned, we say, remember, when you were not there for me, now I'm not going to be for you in any kind of constructive role. I'm not going to provide you any assistance or any kindness. And Makarim al-Akhlaq demands that we don't try to respond as other people may have acted in ignorance or in anger. Rather than view our relationships as a transaction, we should view our relationships as our relationship with Allah, as our transaction with Allah. And so if you showed unkindness to me, you did hirman, man haramak, a person who has deprived you. If I think of my relationship to you as a mutual relationship or a transaction between the two of us, the expected or the understandable response is that I deprive you in return. But if I view my relationship as being between me and Allah, even my relationship with you is really my transaction with Allah, then I should show kindness to you because I want to honor the will of Allah and I seek my reward from Allah, not from another person. And when we are able to respond to hirman with i'ta, if somebody deprives me, I act generously and kindly to that other person. The major benefit that comes is that you create a positive chain reaction in the world. Many people will be affected by that kindness and they may become a little bit more kind or a little bit less unkind in turn. It creates a virtuous cycle, and that goodness will not be limited to the other person, but it will perhaps be extended to that person's family and to other people they come across in the world. And you can see this, that when somebody yells at me, I might come home and yell at my family. That ill will, it's contagious. And similarly, a smile, a kindness, good will is also contagious. It spreads. So i'ta'u man haramak, give to those who have deprived you, and that will bring you a reward from Allah, but it will also create a virtuous cycle within society. And then the fourth and final attribute mentioned by Imam Ja'far Sadiq in this hadith, وَقَوْلُ الْحَقِّ وَلَوْ عَلَى نَفْسِكَ. Speak the truth. This is the same as as-sidq, which came in the earlier hadith that we discussed. قَوْلُ الْحَقِّ وَلَوْ عَلَى نَفْسِكَ. Speak the truth, even if it be to your detriment. Don't twist the facts and twist your words to serve your interest, but speak the words that reflect and that express what is true and what is right. So those were two ahadith, and we can look at one more hadith, and this one is also from Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salatu wassalam. The Imam says that Inna Allah azza wa jalla, Inna lillahi azza wa jalla wujuhan خلقهم من خلقه وأرضه. Allah has created certain people, and the reason why He has created them لقضاء حوائج إخوانهم, in order to meet the hajat, the hawa'ij, the needs of their fellow believers. So sometimes, we see people who are suffering, and alhamdulillah, we are in good health. We have a good economic situation. We see that people around us have lost their jobs, for example, but we still have our jobs. There is a reason and a wisdom why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us that blessing. And this hadith mentions one of those wisdoms and one of those reasons. It is a test. He has created some people and given them the strength in material resources and knowledge and ability to meet the needs of others, so that those who are undergoing hardship can also be helped by those who have a better financial position, a better social position, or a better level of health or other attributes. Allah has created these people لِقَضَاءِ حَوَائِجِ إِخْوَانِهِمْ, in order for the ones who are blessed to help those who are less fortunate. These people يَرَوْنَ الْحَمْدَ مَجْدًا, they see the praise that comes in society, they see the praise of Allah to be an honor. So these people, their inner attributes and their feelings are in line with noble and good attributes, and that makes it easy for them to show generosity. Wallahu subhanahu yuhibbu makarim al-akhlaq. Allah loves these good attributes. Even if you do good, in order for a person to praise you, the fact that you love what is good and that you have the tendency, the preference for makarim al-akhlaq. This is something that is good for society. It is something that is beloved by Allah. Now, of course, Allah wishes us to purify our intention. And so if I do good for other people to praise me, then Allah does want me to work on my sincerity. So eventually I do good for the sake of Allah and not for the sake of praise. But just doing good, showing kindness to others, is a good attribute. And it is one of the makarim al-akhlaq, and Allah loves makarim al-akhlaq. وكان فيما خاطب الله نبيه صلى الله عليه وآله إنك لعلى خلق عظيم. Allah said to the Prophet that you are on noble character, you have a noble character. قال, this was interpreted or explained by Imam Sadiq alayhi salam as as-sakha wa husnul khulq. إنك لعلى خلق عظيم refers, according to Imam Ja'far Sadiq alayhi salatu wasalam, first and foremost to generosity, and second to speaking in a kind and a good manner with fellow believers. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us this makarim al-akhlaq. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to all of us, may He grant sakha and generosity, and may He grant us husnul khulq, the ability to act kindly with our fellow believers. In particular, in these stressful times, may we be able to maintain our best behavior and be a source of tranquility and serenity in our families and in our society. May we not be a factor that increases the stress that other people may feel. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us not just the character, but also the company of Muhammad wa ali Muhammad alayhimu salatu wassalam in this life and in the hereafter. We will now begin Dua Kumail, which will be recited for us by our brother Khalid Abbas and Imam Kashfipur. So let us recite Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Assalamu alaikum to everyone.
Bismillah.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم إني أسألك برحمتك التي وسعت كل شيء وبقوتك التي قهرت بها كل شيء وخزع لها كل شيء وذل لها كل شيء وبجبروتك التي غلبت بها كل شيء وبعزتك التي لا يقوم لها شيء وبعظمتك التي ملأت كل شيء وبسلطانك الذي يلا كل شيء وبوجهك الباقي بعد فناء كل شيء وبأسمائك التي ملأت أركان كل شيء وبعلمك الذي أحاط بكل شيء وبنور وجهك الذي يزع له كل شيء يا نور يا قدوس يا نور يا قدوس يا نور يا قدوس يا أول الأولين ويا آخر الآخرين اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تهتك الإثم اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل النقم اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تغير النعم اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تحبس الدعاء اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل البلاء اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تقطع الرجاء اللهم اغفر لي اللهم اغفر لي كل ذنب أذنبته وكل خطيئة أخطأتها اللهم إني أتقرب إليك بذكرك وأستشفي بك إلى نفسك وأسألك بجودك وكرمك أن تدنيني من قربك وأن توزعني شكرك وأن تلحمني ذكرك اللهم إني أسألك سؤال خازن متذلل خاشعا أن تسامحني وترحمني وتجعلني باسمك راضيا قانعا وفي جميع الأحوال متواضعا اللهم وأسألك الصوال من اشتدت فأكته أنزل بك عند الشدائد حاجته عزم فيما عندك رغبته اللهم أعظم سلطانك وعلى مكانك وخفي مكرك وزهر أمرك وغلب قهرك وجرت قدرتك ولا يمكن الفرار من حكومتك اللهم لا أجد للذنوب وافيا ولا لكباه سافرا ولا لشيء من أملي القبيح بالحسن مبدلا غيرك لا إله إلا أنت سبحانك وبحمدك ظلمت نفسي وتجرأت بجهلي وسكنت إلى قديم ذكرك لي ومنك علي اللهم مولاي كم من قبيح سترت وكم من فادح من البلاء يقلت وكم من عسار وقيته وكم من مكروه دفعته وكم من ثناء جميلا لست أهلا له نشرته اللهم عظم بلائي وافرط بي سوء حالي وكسرت بي أعمالي وقعدت بي أغلالي وحبسني النفس بعد عملي وقد أنت وقد أتني الدنيا بغرورها ونفسي بخيانتها ومتاعي يا سيدي فأسألك بعزتك أن لا يحجب عنك دعائي سوء عملي وفعالي ولا تحصيني بخفي ما اطلعت عليه من سري ولا تواجلني بالعقوبة على ما عملته في خلوات من سوء فعلي وإيساتي ودوام تفريطي وجهالتي وكثرة شهواتي وغفلتي وكن اللهم بعزتك لي في الأحوال كلها رؤوفا وعلي في جميع الأمور يتوفى إلهي وربي من لي غيرك أسأله كشف ضري والنزر في أمري إلهي ومولاي إلهي ومولاي أجريت علي حكما اتبعت فيه هوى نفسي ولم أحترس فيه من حين عدوي أغرني بما أحوى وسعده ولا ذلك الجزاء فتجاوزت بما جري علي من ذلك بعض حدودك وخالفت بعض أوامرك فلك الحجة ولي في جميع ذلك ولا حجة لي فيما جري علي فيه قضاؤك والذم حكمك وبلاؤك وقد آتيتك يا إلهي بعد تقصيري وإسرافي على نفسي معتذرا نادما منكسرا مستقيلا مستغفرا منيبا مقرا مذعنا معترفا لا أجد مفر من مكان مني ولا مفزيا أتوجه إليه في أمري غير قبولك أزري وإدخالك إياي في ساعة من رحمتك اللهم فاقبل أزري وارحم شدة ضري وفكنا وفكني من شدة وساقي يا رب ارحم ضعف بدني يا رب ارحم ضعف بدني يا رب ارحم ضعف بدني ورقة جلدي ودقة عزمي يا من بدأ خلقي وذكري وتربيتي وبري وتقضيتي هبني لابتداء كرمك وصالح برك بي يا إلهي وسيدي وربي فتراك معذبي بنارك بعد توحيدك وبعد ما انتبه إليه قلبي من معرفتك ولهج به لساني من ذكرك وآتقده ضميري من حبك وبعد صدق اعتراف بدوائي خاضعا لربوبيتك هيهات أنت أكرم من أن تزيى من تبيته أو تبعد من أدنيته أو تشرد من آويته أو تسلم إلى البلاء من كفيته ورحمته وليت شعري يا سيدي وإلهي ومولاي فتسلط النار على وجوه خرت لعظمتك ساجدة وعلى ألسن نطقت بتوحيدك صادقة وبشكرك مادحة وعلى قلوب اتركت بإلهيتك محققة وعلى ضمائر هبت من العلم بك حتى صارت خاشعة وعلى جوارها سعت إلى أوطان تؤفتك طاعة وأشارت باستغفارك مذعنة ما هكذا الظن بك ولا أخبرنا بفضلك عنك يا كريم يا رب وأنت تعلم ضعفي أن قليلا من بلاء الدنيا وعقوباتها وما يجري فيها من المكاره حتى أهلها ألا أن ذلك بلاء ومكروه قليل مقصوه يسير بقاؤه كثير مدته وكيف احتمال لبلاء الآخرة وجليل وقوه المكاره فيها وهو بلاء تطول مدته ويدوم مقامه ولا يخفف عن أهله لأنه لا يكون إلا عن غضبك وانتقامك وسخطك وهذا ما لا تقوم له السماوات والأرض يا سيدي فكيف بي وأنا عبدك الضعيف الذليل الحقير المسكين المستقيم يا إلهي وربي وسيدي ومولاي أي الأمور إليك أشكو ولما منها اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد
يا إلهي وربي وسيدي ومولاي لأي الأمور إليك أشكو ولما منها أضج وأبكي لأليم العذاب وشدته أم لطول البلاء ومدته فلئن صيرتني للعقوبات مع أعدائك وجمعت بيني وبين أهل بلائك وفرقت بيني وبين أحبائك وأوليائك فهبني يا إلهي وسيدي ومولاي وربي صبرت على عذابك فكيف أصبر على فراقك وهبني صبرت على حر نارك فكيف أصبر عن النظر إلى كرامتك أم كيف أسكن في النار ورجائي عفوك فبعزتك يا سيدي ومولاي أقسم صادقا لئن تركتني ناطقا لأضجن إليك بين أهلها ضجيج الآملين ولأصرخن إليك صراخ المستصرخين ولأبكين عليك بكاء الفاقدين ولأنادينك أين كنت يا ولي المؤمنين يا غاية آمال العارفين يا غياث المستغيثين يا غياث المستغيثين يا غياث المستغيثين يا حبيب قلوب الصادقين ويا إله العالمين أفتراك سبحانك يا إلهي وبحمدك تسمع فيها صوت عبد مسلم سجن فيها بمخالفته وذاق طعم عذابها بمعصيته وحبس بين أطباقها بجرمه وجريرته وهو يضج إليك ضجيج مؤمل لرحمتك ويناديك بلسان أهل توحيدك ويتوسل إليك بربوبيتك يا مولاي فكيف يبقى في العذاب وهو يرجو ما سلف من حلمك أم كيف تؤلمه النار وهو يأمل فضلك ورحمتك أم كيف يحرقه لهيبها وأنت تسمع صوته وترى مكانه أم كيف يشتمل عليه زفيرها وأنت تعلم ضعفه أم كيف يتقلقل بين أطباقها وأنت تعلم صدقه أم كيف تزجره زبانيتها وهو يناديك يا ربه أم كيف يرجو فضلك في عتقه منها فتتركه فيها هيهات ما ذلك الظن بك ولا المعروف من فضلك ولا مشبه لما عاملت به الموحدين من برك وإحسانك فباليقين أقطع لولا ما حكمت به من تعذيب جاحديك وقضيت به من إخلاد معانديك لجعلت النار كلها بردا وسلاما وما كان لأحد فيها مقرا ولا مقاما لكنك تقدست أسماؤك أقسمت أن تملأها من الكافرين من الجنة والناس أجمعين وأن تخلد فيها المعاندين وأنت جل ثناؤك قلت مبتدأ وتطولت بالإنعام متكرما أفمن كان مؤمنا كمن كان فاسقا لا يستوون يا إلهي وسيدي فأسألك بالقدرة التي قدرتها وبالقضية التي حتمتها وحكمتها وغلبت من عليه أجريتها أن تهب لي في هذه الليلة وفي هذه الساعة كل جرم أجرمته وكل ذنب أذنبته وكل قبيح أسررته وكل جهل عملته كتمته أو أعلنته أخفيته أو أظهرته وكل سيئة أمرت بإثباتها الكرام الكاتبين الذين وكلتهم بحفظ ما يكون مني وجعلتهم شهودا علي مع جوارحي وكنت أنت الرقيب علي من ورائهم والشاهد لما خفي عنهم وبرحمتك أخفيته وبفضلك سترته وأن توفر حظي من كل خير تنزله أو إحسان تفضله أو بر تنشره أو رزق تبسطه أو ذنب تغفره أو خطأ تستره يا ربي يا ربي يا رب يا إلهي وسيدي ومولاي ومالك رقي يا من بيده ناصيتي يا عليما بضري ومسكنتي يا خبيرا بفقري وفاقتي يا ربي يا ربي يا رب أسألك بحقك وقدسك وأعظم صفاتك وأسمائك أن تجعل أوقاتي في الليل والنهار بذكرك معمورة وبخدمتك موصولة وأعمالي عندك مقبولة حتى تكون أعمالي وأورادي كلها وردا واحدا وحالي في خدمتك سرمدا يا سيدي يا من عليه معولي يا من إليه شكوت أحوالي يا ربي يا ربي يا رب قو على خدمتك جوارحي واشدد على العزيمة جوانحي وهب لي الجد في خشيتك والدوام في الاتصال بخدمتك حتى أصرح إليك في ميادين السابقين وأسرع إليك في المبادرين واشتاق إلى قربك في المشتاقين وأدنو منك دنو المخلصين وأخافك مخافة الموقنين وأجتمع في جوارك مع المؤمنين اللهم ومن أرادني بسوء فأرده ومن كادني فكده واجعل لي من أحسن عبيدك نصيبا عندك وأقربهم منزلة منك وأخصهم زلفة لديك فإنه لا ينال ذلك إلا بفضلك وجدني بجودك واعطف علي بمجدك واحفظني برحمتك واجعل لساني بذكرك لهجا وقلبي بحبك متيما ومن علي بحسن إجابتك واقل لي عثرتي واغفر زلتي فإنك قضيت على عبادك بعبادتك وأمرتهم بدعائك وضمنت لهم الإجابة فإليك يا رب نصبت وجهي وإليك يا رب مددت يدي فبعزتك استجب لي دعائي وبلغني مناي ولا تقطع من فضلك رجائي واكفني شر الجن والإنس من أعدائي يا سريع الرضا اغفر لمن لا يملك إلا الدعاء فإنك فعال لما تشاء يا من اسمه دواء وذكره شفاء وطاعته غنى ارحم من رأس ماله الرجاء وسلاحه البكاء يا سابغ النعام يا دافع النقام يا نور المستوحشين في الظلام يا عالما لا يعلم صل على محمد وآل محمد وافعل بي ما أنت أهله وصلى الله على رسوله والأئمة الميامين من آله وسلم تسليما كثيرا اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
السلام عليك يا وارث آدم صفة الله. السلام عليك يا وارث نوح النبي الله. السلام عليك يا وارث إبراهيم خليل الله. السلام عليك يا وارث موسى كليم الله. السلام عليك يا وارث عيسى روح الله. السلام عليك يا وارث محمد حبيب الله. السلام عليك يا وارث أمير المؤمنين ولي الله. السلام عليك يا ابن محمد المصطفى. السلام عليك يا ابن علي المرتضى. السلام عليك يا ابن فاطمة الزهراء. السلام عليك يا ابن خديجة الكبرى. السلام عليك يا ثار الله وابن ثاره والبتر الموتور. أشهد أنك قد قمت الصلاة وآتيت الزكاة وأمرت بالمعروف ونهيت عن المنكر وأطعت الله ورسوله حتى أتاك اليقين. فلعن الله أمة قتلتك ولعن الله أمة ظلمتك ولعن الله أمة سمعت بذلك فرضيت به. يا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله أشهد أنك كنت نورا في الأصلاب الشامخة والأرحام المطهرة لم تنجسك الجاهلية بأنجاسها ولم تلبسك من مدلهمات ثيابها. وأشهد أنك من دعائم الدين وأركان المؤمنين. وأشهد أنك الإمام البر التقي الرزي الزكي الهادي المهدي. وأشهد أن الأئمة من ولدك كلمة التقوى وأعلام الهدى والأروة الوثقى والحجة على أهل الدنيا. وأشهد الله وملائكته وأنبياءه ورسله أني بكم مؤمن وبإيابكم موقن بشرائع ديني وخواتيم عملي. وقلبي لقلبكم سلم وأمري لأمركم متبع. صلوات الله عليكم وعلى أرواحكم وعلى أجسادكم وعلى أجسامكم وعلى شاهدكم وعلى غائبكم وعلى ظاهركم وعلى باطنكم. السلام عليك يا علي بن الحسين. السلام عليك يا أولاد الحسين يا أصحاب الحسين. يا زينب سلام الله عليها يا أسراء الكوفة والشام جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. يا ليتنا كنا معكم فنفوز معكم. السلام عليك يا صاحب العصر والأمر والزمان. السلام عليك يا خليفة الرحمن. السلام عليك يا إمام الإنس والجان. اللمان 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 من فتنة الزمان. عجل الله تعالى فرجك وسهل الله تعالى مخرجك وجعلنا من أنصارك وأعوانك ورحمة الله وبركاته. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد.
Ahsantum, Jazakumullah. And that brings our program to a conclusion for today. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.